Now it's over to Mr. N. Ram, who's former editor-in-chief of The Hindu, is a veteran journalist, veteran of many battles, and he will speak to us about the situation in India, which may or may not be familiar to most of you. Over to you, Ram. You have 8 to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you for doing this. It's a good start that you've been able in a short time to get so many people together, so many voices and viewpoints together in the cause of defending media freedom. And of course, in this context of the G20 meeting. Where do I start? India has a 250-year-old history of the press. Its role in the freedom struggle has been important. Today, it is still quite diverse and pluralistic in terms of numbers. I read from a report by the Reporters Without Borders that India has about 100,000 newspapers, perhaps an exaggeration because many of them will exist only on paper, 380 TV channels, and then a number of independent players. So it's vast, and there are vast spaces as well for the media in India. So it's very hard to generalize, but taking my cue from the report of the of Reporters Without Borders 2023 World Press Freedom, look at the overall situation. They say it's very serious. In 7 out of 10 countries, the environment for journalism is bad, and it's satisfactory in only 3 out of 10. And very serious in 31, it says, countries and territories, I must qualify that. Very serious in 31, difficult in 42, problematic in 55, and good or satisfactory in 52 countries. And I suppose India would fall in the difficult category. I hope not yet very serious category. Although for journalists in Kashmir, certainly they will fall in the media as a whole, the news media and journalists, independent journalists in the Union Territory now, used to be a state of Jammu and Kashmir. It's certainly a very, very serious situation. Recent developments, the Editors Guild of India, which is a very representative and sober body representing many interests, recently it sent a fact-finding team to the northeastern state of Manipur, where fierce, deadly, murderous ethnic violence has been witnessed, attacks particularly on a minority. And a press statement by the Editors Guild released yesterday clearly points out what the mission of that was. It was to look into the media's coverage of ethnic violence in the state and the performance of the media. And in doing this, they met a cross-section of reporters, editors, civil society activists, public intellectuals, women affected by the violence, tribal spokespersons, and also, it's important to add, representatives of security forces operating there. And criminal cases have been launched against them by the police. And the chief minister has made a fierce attack. The chief minister of that state, who's clearly playing on one side, has attacked this journalistic body, this highly respected body, as anti-state and anti-national. And they've issued a statement. I think a criminal case has been launched. I think nothing will come out, perhaps will come out of it eventually, but the process, as they say, is the punishment. I refer to Kashmir, and some of you would have read about what happened to the Kashmir Wala, an independent voice. Its access to it has been, its website has been shut down, its social media accounts have been blocked, and the founder has been in jail for 5 years, Asif Sultan. Several Kashmiri journalists, Fahad Shah, Sajad Gul, Irfan Miraj, and others have been arrested. We don't exactly know the number of journalists arrested in India. They're being tracked because some of them apply for bail. They get bail, and immediately another case is foisted on them. So that's a totally different situation, perhaps, from the rest of India. But coming to the rest of India, I think there was a time when I believed that India was in an enviable position, certainly in the ranks of developing countries, with respect to freedom of speech and expression, of which freedom of the press is an indispensable part. That was 40 years ago. We had an emergency between 1975 and 1977 when there was total censorship. We came out of it, and I think the press, and particularly the Indian language press, there was no TV those days in India. I think it came out in a very vigorous, energetic way, relishing its independence after the emergency regime, which lasted 2.5 years, was defeated in a general election. And everything, and there was a complete rejection of what it stood for. The press was independent. There was investigative journalism. There were many voices, and we really rejoiced in freedom of the press at that time. And over the years, the situation has been up and down. But after the emergency, I cannot think of any time where the situation has been so difficult for the news media as a whole. Now, of course, you have, apart from newspapers, daily newspapers, some of them with vast circulations and readerships, particularly the Indian language newspapers, in print as well as on digital platforms. Print, the trend is print circulation has been gradually coming down, but it's still a very considerable force. It still is the leading factor for revenues from the newspaper, advertising revenues, although the share of advertising revenues is coming down. Then you have a large number of news television channels, and there I think there is a lot of bad news. All the major channels in English have been taken over by big business, usually supporting the government, the BJP government, the Narendra Modi government. And the most shocking thing in recent times was the takeover of one independent news channel in English called NDTV, taken over by Gautam Adani's, the Adani Group. And the whole thing has changed. There are a couple of channels which are notorious for playing a propaganda role. They really do hit jobs. They play along with disinformation on the social media and do hit jobs on those who are independent and speak out. This is a clear trend in India today. But of course, we don't know enough about the performance of the TV channels in various Indian languages, because that's a vast space. We need to do research to discover that. But I know that the state where I live and work, Tamil Nadu, I think they are much better on the whole, the TV news channels. And there are other states where perhaps a similar situation prevails. So I don't want to sound too pessimistic about this, paint too dark a picture about this. But if you look at the English channels, the so-called national channels, it's I think we have some of the worst TV news media in the world, I would say. So comparable perhaps to some of the worst British tabloids, but this is on television. India's ranking, if you look at the overall picture, India's ranking in global, in rankings with respect to global to media freedom globally, has been coming down steadily in an uninterrupted fashion over the last 9 years or so, when this government has been in power, for very good reasons. I think the RSF reports and the index, I think, clearly explain how they do their methodology. They look at the political context, they look at the legal situation, they look at the economic situation, and also with regard to journalist safety. The Committee to Protect Journalists has, I think, justifiably called India one of the most dangerous places for journalists to work. This is not for all journalists. These are selected hits. And we have the data speak for themselves. There's no time to go into the details, but for those interested, just look at the data on the number of journalists killed, work-related killings, journalists and media workers, I should add. Of the 1,596 journalists and media workers killed worldwide in connection with their work, 62 are from India. That's from 1992, when the data began to be gathered. And of these journalists, they were invariably reporting either corruption or political misconduct or crime or human rights violations. They were doing serious reporting. Not all, most of them were small-time journalists, independent journalists in remote areas, but not all of them. Some prominent journalists, including editors, have been targeted and knocked out and taken out. And the list is quite depressing. If you look at it, it continues. And the situation, if you look at the numbers, it's got worse. 10 journalists were murdered across India over the decade beginning May 2004. But in the 9 years, beginning May 2014, where the present government, the present Prime Minister, BJP government has been in office, the toll has risen to 19. But that's not the worst part of it. The CPJ also looks at what it calls impunity, the global impunity index. And unfortunately, India figures in all 15 of the indices since the time they began to be compiled. So I would say that very unfortunate it is, but India is a founding and permanent member, it appears, of this cloud of shame, where journalists get killed in connection with their work and no final justice is not finally rendered. In fact, CPJ has found that globally, 80% of such cases, people, the killers go scot-free. Something is deeply wrong with a system that allows this to go on and on. And I think India is, again, it's not everybody who's targeted, but journalists who are considered inconvenient or dangerous, they are targeted. And I think this goes on. Although even worse than the killing perhaps is the fact that the killers know that they enjoy impunity under the law. We also have other cases, independent media players, digital players, news publishers like The Wire. The Wire was the Delhi police raided The Wire on completely ridiculous charges based on a defamation complaint given by the IT head of the ruling party. Recently, NewsClick, another independent player, which did a good job in reporting on the farmers' agitation, it's been targeted. And ironically, it's the New York Times, a story done by the New York Times about the former businessman and now philanthropist Neville Roy Singham, an American citizen. They did a major story and which included a couple of lazy references to NewsClick, saying that they were putting out Chinese talking points. And the McCarthyite, I say that without exaggeration, the McCarthyite campaign has been unleashed in the social media, supported by some of the TV channels I referred to, targeting this. And the founder and editor of this digital venture, very small digital venture, a progressive digital venture, is now at risk of being arrested on unspecified charges. Journalists are being arrested under laws relating to terrorism, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and also state acts which are draconian in a targeted way. But it's the fate of the Editors Guild of India, which in recent months has issued a number of statements raising concerns. One other thing is what's happening to the censorship of the internet. Internet shutdowns have become extremely frequent in the world. Perhaps the largest number take place in India. But we are also concerned about a set of rules framed under the IT Act of 2000, which permit the executive, the central government, to block, to take down any content that they deem to be inimical to national security. And there seems to be no redress. And the Information Technology Rules 2021, IT Rules 2021 as they're called, the full expansion is the Information Technology, within brackets, Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code rules are really an important part of this internet censorship that is underway. I must add that some high courts have given stay orders, interim stay orders against it, but the government is bent on going ahead.
Ram, can I ask you to wrap up now, please?
Yeah. Under the proposed amendment, there'll be a new category of takedown where any information identified as fake or false by the new enforcers, that fact-check unit of the Press Information Bureau, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, that will be taken down. Finally, I must add that we have one of the world's largest disinformation industries, mostly operated by the followers of the present dispensation. They're known as bucks. We have the largest number of Facebook users in the world, the largest number of WhatsApp users in the world, the largest number perhaps of Instagram users and so on. You know, they really descend on journalism that they don't like. So it is, I guess, a typical, it is, I guess,
Please mute everybody. Yeah, go ahead, Ram.
It's a difficult situation. I don't want to end on this glum note. I think there are many voices and there are many spaces, people who are speaking up. And after the attack on NewsClick, there's been, Siddharth, I think, initiated it, an impressive movement of solidarity with NewsClick. A large number of academics, journalists, and so on have, even former judges have come forward to do it. So the battle lines are drawn, and we hope we'll be able to stop this repression against the media, which Siddharth referred to the outset in India. Thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you very much, Ram, for that comprehensive and rather grim but realistic portrait of what's happening. And it would be apparent to many of our colleagues from across the G20 that the situation in India is perhaps much worse than they would have read about or imagined. So thank you very much for that presentation.